working, thanks, Marcus, working on the Oxfordshire Nature Project alongside Marcus as well. So Marcus, I don't know whether you have any introductory remarks, otherwise I'll hand straight over to Julian, specifically a bit about the City Nature Challenge, which is coming up in April, and would be great for people to get involved with. So
Well,
yeah,
just to say, I've really enjoyed working with Julian and
over
learning from
over to you,
his.
Julian, I think.
Right. Well, hello everyone. I'm just going to say a little bit about my experience with trying to record biodiversity and fit it within the context of the City Nature Challenge, which uses iNaturalist. And so I'll take you through some aspects of using iNaturalist. And many of you might be familiar anyway, but we can then maybe share some notes on how to make it most effective. So firstly, I'm going to just talk about the City Nature Challenge. And I've had a look at Oxfordshire's efforts from last year, which is quite illuminating because it does illustrate some of the challenges of trying to catch up with certain groups of animals and plants, and some are better represented than others. So then I'm going to run through using iNaturalist and then applying it to a case study, some field work that Marcus and I have done recently, where I've captured a load of images and uploaded them into iNaturalist. And that's quite revealing in terms of the way in which iNaturalist verifies records and assesses them in terms of quality. So then, having run through all of that, how do we make recording nature more accessible to a wider public, which is the point of all of this in terms of the City Nature Challenge? So, so the 2026 City Nature Challenge runs from the 24th of April to the 27th of April. That's when the intensive capture of species occurs by people going out into the environment and using iNaturalist. There's then a window following the end of that period for people to sort out their records and make sure that they've submitted everything. The first thing to note is that the City Nature Challenge is a bit of a misnomer because most of the recording isn't really happening in cities, but in the countryside. And although, of course, people might be recording in city green spaces and gardens, but nonetheless, the majority of data comes from the wider landscape. So iNaturalist is generally thought to be easier to use than iRecord. So it's a way of trying to get people more involved and to actually submit some records successfully. It's organized by T-Work, which of course, as you probably know, is our local hub for environmental records for Berkshire and Oxfordshire. So they have a very keen interest in trying to get more of nature recorded on the basis that if we have a better idea of what's where, there's more chance of protecting it, monitoring how it's doing, and warning of potential impacts of developments of one sort or another. So this challenge project sets the following criteria, that really it's all different types of organism to be covered. And Oxfordshire is obviously the location of this particular challenge, open to everybody. To achieve the quality grade, the research grade, as it's called, the record needs some sort of ID, some sort of evidence to support it. And that evidence may come from a variety of media, but mostly it's going to be photographic. And it's got to be between those dates, as I've just run through, and any organization or group of people or individuals can take part. So it's pretty all-encompassing, and it ran last year and it's run previously to that as well. So how did they do in last year's effort? There were nearly 2,000 observations of about 600 species. That sounds quite impressive. And the observations were made by about 143 different participants. And inevitably, most of the species are daylight, visible during the day, or plants in flower, with very, very few mammals, dominated by birds and flowering plants, but a really good showing of insects, not just butterflies. So that's actually quite a surprising result. Now, of these observations, when you look at the participants and how many records they each collected, of the 143, 10 of them accounted for 2/3 of those observations. So there were a few people working extremely hard in taking on this challenge. But that's not to denigrate the ones that only did 1 or 2 records, because the whole point of the exercise is to get more people involved. And, you know, sometimes that might just have been a casual observation of nature, which of course is still worth having. So in order to get records into iNaturalist, I think most people would try and use the app on the phone. So you download the app from the iNaturalist via the App Store. And the idea is to use it to take images of what you want to record, or to record the sound, such as a bird singing. And the app then makes suggestions. Some of those suggestions might be spot on. Others might be a variety of suggestions with a level of uncertainty. If you use the app in the field to take records, it automatically stores the location, and it also offers you the selection that you can see on the right there to take a photo, to upload a photo that you might have already taken, to record a sound, or to get an instant ID in the camera. So those are all things that you're offered when you're operating iNaturalist on the phone. Another route is to go out there with a camera to take photos of different species. Hopefully you've got a camera with a GPS capability. Otherwise, you can use a GPS tool to record your location, for instance, on your phone. And you can record bird songs, perhaps using the video on your phone. So there are two different ways of using iNaturalist, depending on not just what's easiest, but what sort of quality of record you need to get. So the quality in iNaturalist follows 11 criteria, and they're fairly obvious that, the record has to contain the location, the date, provide some evidence, either photos or sounds, and is recognized by two or more verifiers as being correct. And it's, it is specifically asking for wild creatures. It's got to relate to a single subject rather than, a record of a confusing array of different organisms all leaning into the camera frame. So it's a fairly straightforward set of criteria to achieve research grade. There's nothing there that you wouldn't expect. I think, if it does meet those criteria, it becomes a record that can then be passed on to TVERC to form part of their records for the area. So that would be a good outcome. And it tells you, once you've uploaded your record, where you are in that process, because it can take a bit of time to get the ID of more difficult sorts of creatures verified by one of the iNaturalist community. So some things are looked at and verified almost instantly, and others not. So I mentioned a moment ago about the different ways of getting the data into iNaturalist. You can stand there in the field with your phone, with the app loaded, and you can take pictures or make a recording. So that has the advantage of being highly convenient. But the disadvantages are around whether or not you can get a good enough image, depending on what the subject is. So it becomes a bit problematic with smaller creatures, although you can nowadays buy a macro lens attachment for a smartphone. But otherwise, even with a really good smartphone, it's quite tricky to get pictures of insects that are small and also possibly moving quickly. So the result is trying to do everything in the field. You might get more records more quickly, but you may be less likely to achieve the research grade in terms of the quality assessment. So a slower way of getting the same sort of recording basis is to actually take a camera into the field, and ideally something which can take good images, possibly with a macro lens. It's more work because you then need to upload those once you get home and upload them into your iNaturalist account. However, it has the advantage of, with better quality images, more likely to be of use to T-work, particularly if you can edit and crop some of the shots before you submit them. So, so it's a bit of a trade-off between speed, convenience, and quality. But I dare say some people that are really used to using iNaturalist a lot are able to use the app in the field and get quite reasonable results. So I had some experience of this in this case study, which I'm just going to talk a little bit about, which is relates to the Iffley horse meadow and woods, just on the edge of Iffley, near next to Oriel Meadow. So this area is shown in a land app map, which Marcus put together. It's a couple of fields and a bit of woodland. So I went into those fields with my camera and a GPS Garmin device for precise recording of locations. The reason for that was wanting to know exactly where each tree stood, to build up a longer term picture of this area. And when we turned up there on the 17th of March, there was a beautiful area of for insects. The cherry laurel was in blossom, and so I spent the most time there trying to record as many bees and wasps and other insects, and also sun-basking butterflies. So I took the approach of taking photos, and the photos here are actually embedded in Land App, so you can import photos into Land App, so you can see exactly where the photos were taken. But you'll notice that some of the locations are clearly wrong, and that's something that you can fix once you've loaded up everything. So that there's a couple of photos which are outside the area, and those can be edited later and moved to the correct locations. So getting back to the iNaturalist upload, those are some of the images from the camera work in the field. So some of these are quite small insects, like this mining bee at the bottom, and there's an ignumid wasp also on the bottom row. Some of them are creatures which are much more easily captured, although quite fast moving. A brimstone butterfly moves pretty fast, particularly on a sunny day. So these are the images that I uploaded into iNaturalist just to see what iNaturalist would do. And iNaturalist produces a very handy map, which again shows the locational data stored in the original images, So you can see there are a few points here which are incorrect that need to be moved back to the sites where they were actually taken. So I can do that using the GPS records that the GPS points that I recorded. So on the right, you can see that it's looked at one of the mining bees and decided that this one is most likely an early mining bee, and it makes that as a suggested ID along with a number of others. So, so the records are uploaded, and then you can look at the suggestions and some of the alternatives. So here's the outcome of just a number of the ones that I uploaded. You can see that only half of my records have so far reached research grade, and that goes back to the problem of whether or not things are really easily verified. So my parasitic wasp that I thought was this Ignumen stramentor species, it's it needs to be ID'd by two further validators if it's to be achieve research grade. And similarly with the three species of solitary bee that I found, including the one I just showed you, the early mining bee. So even with a good quality image, that's only part of the challenge in trying to get the records up to research grade, and then part of the regional database for biodiversity records. So I think that's quite interesting. It shows you that some groups are a lot easier to verify than others. And I guess that relates to areas of rather patchy expertise where there aren't enough people available to look at the records and to say what's what. Here is a bit more detail that you get. iNaturalist is quite well constructed when you sort of drill down into the records. So on the left here, you've got the photo that I took of a tapered dronefly. So I got quite close to it with my macro lens. And then on the right, you can see one of the images offered by iNaturalist. And it gives you the lowdown in terms of the seasonality of that particular dronefly. And you can see that on the 17th of March, there was a good likelihood that we were in season for that species. And down below, you can see more images and some alternative suggestions for what that particular fly might be. So that's a very strong feature of iNaturalist. I mean, the iRecord does similar things as well, but this is quite nicely laid out. When it comes to my parasitic wasp, I tried to take shots from different angles to try and increase the chances of being able to really nail down what it was. So I'm still waiting to hear the outcome. And although it has most of the characteristics of that wasp that you can see at the top, and we'll just have to wait and see. It's amazingly difficult to photograph some of these creatures. Ignumid wasp is very fast. It doesn't stay in one place for very long. As you can see in my bottom image there, it was just about to disappear again. I'm sure many of you have got similar experiences. Of course, there are some species that are extremely difficult to verify, and might need really very specialist input. And this picture shows a training session that we did at Wild Wantage on different species of bumblebees, and we found what we thought was a brown banded carder, which was quite an exciting record. So I tried to take photos of it that would be suitable for the record to be verified. So that was our bee. You can see it in the dot here, just on the outskirts of Wantage. And this record is in iRecord, showing the distribution of brown-banded carder records elsewhere in the local environment. So having done that observation last year, I still don't know if the record is actually of a brown-banded carder. It hasn't been verified. So the final resort might be to try and entice a specialist to actually go out into the field and see if they can find the species, because it's quite a rare one, and there are very few records for Oxfordshire. It might not be rare, it might just be overlooked, given its similarity to other carder bees. So that's just one of the challenges of trying to get these records in a form that is useful, particularly when you're looking at some of the rarer species. So I've spoken a little bit about using iNaturalist, and I've run biodiversity surveys trying to engage with a wider public. You have to be as non-technical as possible and definitely non-academic in the approach if you want to keep people's interest levels up, and maybe start with some of the easier species and make the point that some of the common species are worth recording, and indeed some of the really common species are hardly recorded at all. So I think that's a point worth making, just so that they can get into the gist of making a record, and maybe getting hooked in doing that. And another thing is to try and get them to focus on places that they're used to walking through regularly, rather than the need to make a special expedition to go out and record nature. And I think that can maybe help to get people more involved, because once they start looking at the familiar, they might see things that they've never noticed before as they look closer at their surroundings, and maybe a plant or an insect that they didn't realize was there. And then, of course, to explain why recording isn't just a casual pursuit, it's actually very important as you all know, in terms of trying to make the picture clearer in terms of species that there are, their number, their abundance, and how that might change through time. So that's pretty much my sort of remarks on using iNaturalist, and you probably got different ideas on how best to engage a wider audience with this type of recording, things that might work, to try and change the picture. I mean, the fact that only 10 people did 2/3 of the effort in terms of species observations last year. I mean, that's obviously a tremendous effort, but by those 10 people, there was one that put up some 400 observations made in a 4-day period. I mean, they must barely have slept during that period, I guess. And it's just that how do you maybe entice more of the people that come along to maybe take it a bit further? So I think that's something where, collectively we need to think in terms of how best to do it.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Julian.